The movements we were doing in the gym were isolating one area and drawing it away from that ideal alignment. This trend, the logical approach it was taking was not aligned, no pun intended, with chiropractic philosophy. That's just promoted more understanding. And now those chronic pains, the likelihood of those things occurring are a lot less than the conventional way in which we have been selecting our exercises to work out.
Hey, fitness and health fans, it's game on with another episode of the Sporting Good Posture podcast. Get Coach Margella's advice from the sidelines as he helps you crush your game, no matter what health or fitness game you play.
Hey, I'm Coach Margella. I'm Sporting Good Posture. What are you sporting?
Hey, Coach Margella, what's your advice today?
Welcome back to another episode of Sporting Good Posture. This is Coach Margella here, and today I have Rocky Snyder to do an interview with us. And Rocky's had over 30 years experience in the strength and conditioning and fitness world. He's most recently written a book called Return to Center, and he's worked with many athletes over the years. He has a personal training studio out there in California. And I just wanted to welcome you today, Rocky, to the show. And thanks again for taking the time today.
Frank, it's a pleasure. I'm happy to be here and excited to talk about all things sports and fitness and chiropractic for that matter, and posture, obviously.
Absolutely. Well, this is a real pleasure for me because I'm very into sports and I really enjoy sports my whole life. And I was reading your bio and about your recent book, the Return to Center, and I wanted to see how you got so innovative on the posture and the gait and the balance. I mean, like I was talking to you earlier before we started the interview, that it sounded like you were a chiropractor as well, and you really take a lot of pride into the underlying conditions that people have that cause these imbalances. That's the basis of what I do. So how did you get into that, like at that level?
Well, just like anybody else, I grew up and somebody brought me to a gym and they showed me exercises here and there. And I was in New England at the time. I grew up there just north of Boston, a little suburb. I was working for my cousin's asphalt paving business. So in the summer sweat and humidity of New England, I'd go and stomp on hot asphalt all day and then go with my buddy to a gym and just get more greasy and sweaty. And honestly, I loved every minute of it. I loved how my body was changing. It was phenomenal. And I just couldn't really get enough. And after going to the university there and moving out west, I continued to work out and got a job in a health club. And it wasn't long after, in the early 90s, that personal training was beginning. And I got selected as one of their first personal trainers. And at that time, it wasn't anything more than maybe some CEOs of corporations would hire a trainer, or Hollywood celebrities down in Southern California might do that. But it was just something that was beginning. So kind of being on the front edge of that, I didn't know really what I should do. So I got certified with the National Strength and Conditioning Association and became a certified strength and conditioning specialist. And that just promoted more learning and education. And the interesting thing is, at that time in the 90s, you go into a health club and you see all these circuit training machines. And yep. As a staff member, you're supposed to put people on these machines with these little instruction placards beside it, tell them how to operate it, how to make the adjustments, and then go at it. And then what started happening, and what I saw in the background, though, was people were coming in and they started complaining about, oh, my elbow bothers me when I do this movement, or my knee is bugging me when I do this. And it wasn't like they were coming in with those issues to begin with, but they were almost developing the more they were working out. And I had to scratch my head and go, kind of, what's going on there? So I got myself a mentor, long story short, who was all about muscular balance and function development. In fact, that's what his consulting business was called. And he was all about educating trainers and health practitioners on the importance of posture and how when we bring the body into a better aligned position, joint spacing is at its optimal place, joint function, muscular balance, not to mention where the organs are situated in the body. Everything is kind of upregulated to its optimal best. And I realized that the movements we were doing in the gym were isolating one area and drawing it away from that ideal alignment. unless you were perfectly approaching it in a much more balanced way, which nobody was. So
Right.
what I began to see is this whole health, fitness, I won't say craze, but trend that was continuing to occur was being done in a really in a really, I won't say illogical way, but the logical approach it was taking was not aligned, no pun intended, with a chiropractic philosophy. So that's where I went, and that's just promoted more understanding of biomechanics, human movement, kinesiology, and I've just been exploring it for the last 25 to 30 years. And now it's actually, after that time, it's making more and more sense, and now can develop a methodology where we can go into the gym and actually have it be more aligned with balancing out the body. So those chronic pains are actually going to be, well, I won't say eliminated, but the likelihood of those things occurring are a lot less than the previous type of approach, the conventional way in which we have been kind of selecting our exercises to work out.
Well, everything you just said describes me going to the gym in the 90s and trying to play football and baseball and all the sports I was playing. And as a kid, all we think about is let's get big, let's bench as much as we can, let's squat as much as we can. And I have had all the injuries that you just mentioned. I had the elbow tendonitis, I had shoulder rotator cuff problems, I started getting back problems. And I was strong too, and I could work through some of it, but I kept getting these nagging, stupid injuries as a young kid, and I kept wondering, why is this happening to me?
Exactly. I mean, I have had the same experience with I won't say with my kids necessarily. I've got two of them. My daughter, she's actually the football player in the family, interestingly enough. She plays for Santa Cruz High School, and this will be her senior year. Hopefully the season will be underway. Yeah, she's the only female player on the team. But the cool thing with that is not only is she kind of the trendsetter, the cool thing was last year during her junior year, the coaches did something that most high school coaches are not known for. They allowed for a strength and conditioning specialist to enter their realm and to take a look at their conditioning program. They were very welcoming of me, and I went in and tried not to step on toes. And I looked at their conditioning program, and I found exactly what your program back then probably was. And that was more of a bodybuilder's program where you're going to do these breakdown movements. I'm going to do chest and shoulders on one day, or arms and abs another, and I'm going to do legs and back another, or however you're going to put it together.
That's right.
And that's great if you're going to be on stage in like a Speedo with oiled up body, right? If you're going to train like a bodybuilder, you should compete like a bodybuilder. But if you want to be a football player, you need to have different kind of multi-dimensional movements. You need to be able to stop on a dime. You need to actually be able to go laterally as well as rotate. And when we looked at their program, there was nothing in it to condition and strengthen the players in that way. So we revamped it. Long story short, they went on for a season where the athletic trainer ran out to the field through the entire season. She probably had to head out to the field maybe 3 or 4 times in the entire season.
Wow.
Compared to the athletic trainers that were doing that in one game. And they advanced on to as far as the history of Santa Cruz High School has gone in a football season. They became almost Northern California champions. And with a state of 40 million in it, you can imagine how many high schools in it. They became section champions, Central Coast champions, went on to Northern California. They were about 2 games away from being state champs. It was remarkable. And I know it was a lot to do with the talent level of the athletes and the level of coaching that was there. But I do like to think that there was some element of their strength conditioning program that afforded them that opportunity to advance where they did.
What you did was huge for those kids. And I wish that more schools did something like that, because there are so many bad habits that we get into in high school and so many improper techniques that are taught by the coaches, and not on purpose. They just don't know what they don't know. And they start getting injuries. I look back, I started going to a chiropractor in high school because I started getting these injuries and I couldn't figure out why. And that definitely helped me. But even today, this is 20 years later, I still have some imbalances from doing the things wrong as a high school kid.
And unless you are able to give the body a new experience. Of course, here I am preaching to the choir here, but structure and movement, that's all regulated in the old brain, we'll call it, the one that is situated back in the base of our brain, cerebellum, brainstem, medulla, all that area. That's where the information is, and it is very binary. Its role in life is just simply to survive. So any excess waste of energy, anything that is less efficient, is not going to be something the brain's going to latch onto. But we're going to be able to move based on your injuries, right? You're going to find the next efficient way in which to move your body around the issues in the tissues, so to speak, right? And then you find the next efficient way, and now that's the way in which you move through life. It's going to place strain and wear and tear on certain areas because it's not the most ideal way, but at least it's better than trying to be in the position you were in, which was causing pain. So we're constantly adapting. But the interesting thing here is if we can feed a movement back into your system that is more efficient, that is more proper with joint mechanics and does not cause pain, your unconscious brain or subconscious brain is going to go, wow, actually, that's better for me in the long run. That aligns with my survival mode. Let's do that more often. And it goes from a 0 over to the 1 in that binary kind of approach. So you had asked me, you sound like you're a chiropractor because of the stuff that's in the book. I actually feel like I'm more of a historian. When I see somebody, when people come in to see me in my studio, which we'll take athletes, and can I give you a little story? Do you mind that?
Absolutely. I'd love to hear about it.
So, okay. I have this professional athlete come in and see me. Now, his sport is not mainstream. He's a handball player. And
I read about this.
Handball was very popular through the 70s and 80s, and it still exists in pockets throughout the world, Ireland, the Midwest, California, New York, and so on, Southern California. There are these enclaves of communities with handball players. Well, he was actually the national champion for the junior league, and then he moved up into the adult league, and he was ranked somewhere in the top 5 in the world. But he was nagging. He had this shoulder problem that was just continuing on. Now, if you're not familiar with handball, you're playing in a 40 by 20 square box, and this little rubber ball is traveling with these level athletes are around 90 miles an hour, and you have to hit it with the palm of your hand and return it against the front wall and so on. So it's a lot of powerful, ballistic, exploding like actions. And his shoulder was just getting torn up. And he went for one surgery and went through the proper conventional rehabilitation protocol and felt better. But within a short amount of time, the shoulder kept on bugging him. And he went for a second surgery, and it was the same result. And he was about to go for a third surgery, and then a mutual friend of ours had recommended he come and see me. So we sat down and we went through his history. And this is the point of being a historian, is I want to know what brought on that shoulder. It didn't wake up one day and just decide for the heck of it to give him trouble. There were underlying reasons. This was a reaction to something else that was occurring in his entire body. And more often than not, the problem is never where the X is. X doesn't mark the spot. It's where something is manifesting because the rest of the body isn't doing what they should be doing. So we kind of worked back in time and got all these injuries all laid out and tried to create like almost a storyline of his life. Like this happened, so then this happened. And so what we brought it back to is he had actually broken his big toe on the opposite foot of his injured shoulder. So right shoulder, it was his left big foot, left big toe. And what we realized was he was not wanting to get weight on it. Now, this was years and years ago that he had broken that toe, but his movement pattern had been reinforced all through those years to not want to bear weight over there. And in order for him to be able to use his hips to slow down that huge arm swing, he needed to get on the front portion of his foot and load into that big toe area so that his glutes and his hamstrings and across the lower back and over onto the rib cage, the lats, all those had to kind of stretch out like a rubber band and slow the motion of the hand down. Well, if he wasn't getting on the front of his foot, he wasn't able to access all those components. And what was left to slow it down but the rotator cuff tissue all on the backside of his shoulder. And it just kept getting beat and beat. So as soon as we got him to find load-bearing movements into the front of that foot and to actually fully, I would say, rehabilitate, but fully re-educate movement over there, things weren't going to happen. So once we did that, and I say once, like after just a couple of movements, he started moving his shoulder and it started feeling better. Not over weeks, not over months. We weren't looking to hypertrophy a muscle and grow it in size. We were looking for the motor neurology or the neuromuscular patterning. And as soon as we got that patterning better established, the result was instantaneous, or it travels at the speed of nerve. So rather than weeks, we did something in a matter of minutes that helped it out.
I have that happen a lot at my office where somebody's imbalances in their feet turn out to be a neck problem or a shoulder problem. I had that just this week, and I had somebody come in the other day, and we actually, one of the first things we do in the office, we do a foot scan to see what's going on with the arches of the feet, but also it tells you how much percentage of weight you're putting on the right and the left. And this person was like 62% on one side and 38% on the other. And they're like, well, my feet don't hurt. I said, yeah, but it's not about where the pain is. It's about where the problem's happening. And the cause of the problem was actually the imbalance in the feet, which created a whole imbalance pattern all the way up. And incorrectly, they were doing exercises wrong. And it made that almost similar to like what this guy was having. And I remember I was reading too, you talked about what you thought about with arches, and definitely those rigid supports are not good for people's feet, where it's that hard like plastic that they use in the shoes. We'll do some orthotics with people, but it's the softer ones, and it supports all three arches instead of just the one on the medial side. Mm-hmm. And I was reading about how you've talked about that and some of your opinions on that, but that's so true about how the base, will affect the foundational base, will affect the whole body.
Very much so. We also have a force plate here, and I use that. I was just on with a client yesterday who happens to be a surfer. Of course, I'm in Santa Cruz, so if one of the city ordinances is if you don't surf here, you're not allowed to live here, basically. But this one guy came in. He had bilateral knee issues, and he is quite an accomplished surfer, but he was in a lot of pain. And it hadn't been going on for that long, maybe just a couple months. And it started with one knee, and then it began to bother the other knee. And so again, we just take the history and so on. But here he stood on the force plate, and he was not putting much weight in his forefeet. And so what you can do with the force plate too is, if you understand joint mechanics and the relationships each joint has, then you can actually take the information on that force plate and you can pretty much map out with an educated hypothesis what the rest of the skeletal structure is doing. And then you can get a sense of if it's shifting in one direction or if there's torsion or rotation somewhere, and you can just start to go up the chain. And then what we typically do is we look at that information, we make some notes, and then we look at the athlete's posture and find out, do these two pieces of information align themselves, or where do they break away from the ideal in terms of joint mechanics? And then that might be a place in which we can kind of dive into and see, okay, well, the hip is supposed to be going in this direction, but it's not. That's interesting, because really all we're talking about when we're looking at posture is the subconscious's strategy in which to fight gravity. Like, how are we managing the mass of our body and all these segments as one integrated unit against the force of gravity? Which, in essence, wouldn't that be a nice place from which to start designing strength and conditioning programs? Because the problem here, and the reason why I wrote the book, is because even if we look at football, you've been a football player, go Irish. When we look back at about 1978 at the University of Nebraska, there was a fellow by the name of Bob Devaney, and he approached the University of Nebraska head coach football and said, "Coach, I'd like to take your athletes into the gym and start to make them even stronger on the field and more conditioned." And the coach said, "Okay, I'm going to let you do this, but you start breaking my players. And it's over. You'll never get a job in this town again." Because at that time, there wasn't a lot of strength conditioning in in sports. It was just you play the sport, you do some calisthenics, and you just go play. So he started putting together these strength and conditioning programs, and that's kind of where the NSCA came from. But what are you going to select as your exercises to train football players? Well, he based it on bodybuilding, powerlifting, and weightlifting. And to this day, we're still seeing programs that are very much kind of born out of that philosophy. But the problem there is that all three competitive sports there of bodybuilding, powerlifting, and Olympic lifting aren't really addressing, or they don't even have the fundamental goal of bringing the body back into alignment. Chiropractic, happy birthday, by the way. You're 125 years old today, or not
Thank
today,
you.
but this year, right?
Yeah.
Palmer adjusted the deaf custodian 125
right.
years ago, and it was
history.
all born, right? And then look, we've got yoga. Yoga's been around for 5,000 to 10,000 years. And what's its fundamental goal? But to realign the body, we can say chakras or whatever, but it's in essence to bring the body back into alignment. Acupuncture, same thing.
Yes.
I don't know how popular it is in the hills of Tennessee. Hopefully it's becoming more mainstream. California, it's on every street corner here, but it's been around for 1,500 to 1,000, 1,500 years or more. And all of that is to realign the energy flow, the chi. Martial arts the same way. If we look at cultures from outside of our Western world, we will find that the fundamental goal of most movement practices is to draw the body back into a more aligned position. But for some reason, we don't do that here. We go to the workout, and it's all about how much can I lift and how good can I look in a Speedo, right? Well, not a Speedo, but maybe swim trunks or something, or maybe out of the swim trunks. Yeah. How nice can I look naked in front of the mirror? That's really the approach to American fitness right there. You see it all the time. So here we go. So what are we going to do about it? Well, why don't we look at posture and take the information from the chiropractic world and realize that if we start to figure out where a person is in space, then that's going to give us an idea of what movements and exercises, if you will, I don't like using that word, but what experiences can we feed into the body that are actually going to strengthen them in a way that draws them back into alignment for a heightened level of athletic performance? Because that's really what we're talking to.
Do you find a similar pattern in most people nowadays, or is there a certain pattern for women or a certain pattern for men that you find that the imbalances are more pronounced in one group or the other?
It may be gender bias, perhaps, just because of the structure of the human form. Women have a greater Q angle, which is the femurs or thigh bones, how they exit out of the pelvis and create the knee below, compared to men, partly because of reproduction, birthing issues, and wider hips and so on. There may be some things to do with that. Vladimir Yanda was this brilliant and exercise physiologist. I'm not sure if he was a physical therapist or not, but he was just a guru in the movement world. And he came up with this kind of these two syndromes, if you will, upper cross and lower cross syndrome, that talk about the different types of posture, right? But really, I think of it more as, can we think in three-dimensional space? There's only so many options that the human body can actually move. If we break it down, like the pelvis itself can either tilt forward or backwards in that direction. Right? It can glide to the side or tilt to the side in the frontal plane, and it can either rotate to the right or to the left. And the rib cage, if we're going to try and balance our mass on top of the pelvis, like a stack of cups on a waiter's tray, if one tilts in one direction, then the other has to balance it out by tilting in the opposite direction. So the rib cage and the pelvis move in opposition, which allow the muscles that connect between the two to lengthen and shorten. And it's really how we move through space, is through opposition, lengthening it like a slingshot and then contracting to fly across the room. And the head, balancing and teetering on the rib cage, has to move in opposition to the ribs itself. So if we think about it, really the pelvis and the skull are moving in the same direction in any plane of motion while the ribs oppose it. And we find this oppositional action everywhere. Here's a cool thing, Doc. When I found out, when I was learning with my mentors, one thing they said really hit home is every postural distortion that you can think of, almost every one, is going to be occurring at some brief moment in time during the gait cycle. So if we can consider kyphosis or lordosis or counter rotations, a valgus knee, a dropped arch, a high rigid arch, any of these distortions away from neutral or balance are actually going to occur when people move. So then you can scratch your head and go, well, if they're exhibiting a distortion of this sort, then maybe they are just fixated. Maybe they're stuck in that gait phase. Maybe they don't know how to either enter into it properly or exit out of it. So now we can look at gait mechanics, and we can kind of pile that onto posture, because posture is telling us how we stand in place with both feet against gravity, but gait is going to tell us how we take that structure and land on planet Earth and push off of planet Earth and basically move through space. So those are the bedrock from which I start to actually develop strength and conditioning programs.
What Rocky was just talking about with some of those terms, for those of you that may not be familiar, lordosis is there's a curve in your neck, and it's basically like a C-shaped curve, and the same thing in your low back. And if it's too flat or too curved, it's not in the right position, and that's what he's talking about there. And then the kyphosis is the part of the middle of your back where it goes the opposite way of the other curve. And if it's too big or too small, you'll have imbalances as well, and you'll have poor posture. You'll have forward head carriage. And when he talks about the valgus knee, that's when the knee is turning in as opposed to being in a neutral position. And most people that come into a chiropractor, most of my patients that have come in, I see these problems in their bodies. And what he was talking about with walking, one of the biggest things, you can watch anybody walk. And if you ever watch somebody walk, you'll see their feet turn in, you'll see their feet turn out. They might be pigeon-toed, or they might be where their feet are going wide. And when you watch somebody walk like that, that immediately puts the whole pattern of gait in jeopardy of being imbalanced. And those are the problems that you can just watch somebody doing. You can go to the mall one day and watch everybody walk around and just see how many problems people have with the way they walk and their posture as well. You can see when the posture gets so far forward, you can see that they're having health problems. Just a matter of that. It's hard for them to even breathe. And I'm sure,
or be happy, right? Or just have a good mood.
Exactly.
So to answer your question about different kind of shapes or positions or if I see patterns, yes, the answer is yes. There are, if we could look at how the body moves through space and how these bones are kind of positioned in areas of the body and they move in opposition, we can actually filter it down to 8 body shapes or 8 body positions where the hips are tilted forward and the ribs are tilted back and the head's tilted forward. Or the opposite position where the hips are tilted under, the tailbone's tucked under, and the rib cage is coming forward and the head's kind of tilting back like grandpa walking with a cane. We could see that the hips are kind of gliding off to the right and the rib cage gliding off to the left and the head gliding off to the right. And that would be kind of somebody that's experiencing a scoliotic shift, that sideways shift or scoliosis in the spine. We can see it on either side. And then we can also see like a teenage girl with attitude, how one hip is hiked up and then she's leaning over that and with her arms crossed. I don't know why I come up with that, but I do have an 18-year-old living at home right now, and maybe that's reminiscent of that. But then we got on both sides, right? And then you've got the rotation. Like you could see somebody whose hips are turned to the right, but the rib cage is tried to square off by rotating to the left, and then the head has to deal with that. So when you boil it down, there's 8 body shapes. And now, not that everyone has to form evenly into one or a combination of those shapes, but that's kind of a great starting point to understand how the body moves and then how to discern what exercises that we're already doing in a gym setting that might benefit people based on their posture. You were talking about orthotics earlier, and I actually use these little foam wedges to put the foot into a more balanced position when performing some type of movements in the gym. And what we've found is, or what I have learned from my mentors, is that the bones in the feet, when they move in a certain way, they relate to other bones in the body and they help to allow movement further up the chain. So orthotics can be a good tool, but we also need to educate the body in terms of what it needs to do while in that balanced position. And I love that you use the soft orthotics that allow the foot to move rather than the rigid ones that prevent it from doing half of its job, because the foot does need to descend, but it also needs to learn how to come out of that. Most people, 80%, are going to have arches that have a tendency to drop down. That affects the position of the ankle, which in turn will dictate the role of the knee and the hip. And then we start looking at what the muscles are doing around these joints that have shifted, and we'll find some are being lengthened and pulled and kind of in a weakened state. And like we were talking about the Predators and the Titans earlier before the show, football teams there. Do you know, I found an interesting statistic with the NFL that 11% of the NFL players will experience an ACL injury. It may not be career ending, but it definitely pulls them out of at least one game, which could offset the outcome. You know, it could mean the difference between a W and an L. So it's really interesting that you have the highest caliber professional athletes in a sport, and yet you still have this 1 out of every 10 of those players are going to have a specific injury. That just screams attention to me, going, okay, what is going on here? It's not the sport. It's not the movement itself. It's the body that's doing the movement. And so how are we conditioning these athletes? And interestingly enough, a couple of weeks ago, I got a phone call, and it happened to be one of the athletic trainers from one of the NFL teams who picked up my book and it proceeded to have an hour-long kind of Q&A with me, a conversation to go, okay, what do we do? Can we get you out there? Maybe in the off season, have an in-service with you. I'm like, yeah, I would love to start coming around to the NFL teams and seeing what we can do with that. Because that whole ACL, which is the anterior cruciate ligament, one of those ligaments connecting the thigh bone to the shin bone, and that ligament helps keep the knee in place. But the muscles surrounding the knee are supposed to slow down movement and create force in that area. But if they're weakened or they're out of position, they're not going to be able to do it as much. And if you're talking about a 265-pound player running full bore and then having to change direction, if that tissue around the knee, for that matter around the foot and the hip and through the whole body, isn't prepared for those movements, then bad things happen. And doing leg extensions and squats and deadlifts and standing like a tree and lifting weights is not necessarily going to get you prepared for diagonal jaunts across and juking a player. There's got to be a different approach. So sorry to rant on that, but there you go.
It's funny you said that. There was an episode I did with Melanie Collins. She's actually a sideline reporter for the NFL. And this is a subject we talked about because it's so prevalent in the NFL and many sports. And a lot of those injuries happen when no one even gets hit. They just fall on their own. You'll see them in the backfield, get the handoff. They'll make a cut and they drop to the ground and nobody even hit them. And it's right. It's because of the imbalances. It's not because of the sport. It's because of improper training and improper imbalances in the body that created that problem that was a ticking time bomb that was going to go off at some point. And as somebody that plays fantasy football, it's the worst when it's your running back that happens to.
Exactly. Yeah, we got Julian Edelman with the New England Patriots. He was just running straight up the field. Two players were coming to him. He made one little shift, and then he comes up lame, hopping around. He was out for the rest of the season, torn ACL. And then former Patriot, now a Niners quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, the year before last, same thing happened. And then they go off and they go to the Super Bowl. So where would those two teams be if two of their key players hadn't had that happen to them? And Grant, these things are going to occur, but the prevalence that they are occurring in sports right now is really too frequently. And to drop that number down would be great. So we have to look at, okay, well, how are these bodies being conditioned? How are they being trained? Is it actually sport specific? And I'll argue the point that almost no athlete is actually training specifically. They may be trying to select exercises that somewhat mimic, but it's not really happening. They're not putting themselves in those sport positions and then loading the body. They're staying with the old-fashioned mechanical linear kind of approach that bodybuilding and powerlifting and Olympic lifting continually reinforce. So, it's kind of when we think about it, those three competitions, it'd be like trying to train somebody, figuring that swimming is the best overall kind of way to get the body in shape. And so when you go to the gym, now everything is going to be related to swimming. And so you get a basketball player coming in and you're going to give them swim-related mechanics and you expect them to perform better on the court. That's essentially what's been going on. We've been trying to train people to be power lifters, Olympic lifters, and bodybuilders and expect them to carry over well onto the tennis court or onto the soccer pitch. It's not happening.
Yeah, that's so true. And like you were saying, we see a lot of these same nagging injuries even in people that aren't pro athletes. A lot of people that play tennis, I see a lot of tennis elbow and tendonitis in the shoulder and in the elbow. We see a lot of problems with fallen arches in people, tons of knee problems. I'm sure you see it all the time. People that have probably already had meniscus surgeries or even had the torn ACLs because of imbalances. This is common in many sports, and you see so many now, ACL in football. I'm even seeing it more now in basketball, which you hadn't seen before. And I think it's more because these guys are building, they're bigger players now. They're strong. They're built like football players, and they're playing in a sport where they're making cuts constantly. And then you see more of these ACL injuries in basketball now too.
I couldn't agree more, because look at our culture. I mean, you are going to get inundated in the next 18 months is my prediction, partly because of the state of affairs in this nation right now and the lack of purposeful physical movement as we be contained or quarantined in contained locations. The bodies are not moving as much as they could. And to be honest, they weren't moving very well or as frequently as they should to begin with. I mean, talk about history. If we look at the history of mankind, we will see that we have this exponential curve when it comes to the sedentary lifestyle. Every passing year, the human form, at least in our nation, is becoming structurally weaker and weaker because technology is getting more advanced. We have luxury wheelchairs that we drive around on roads. We have luxury wheelchairs that are ergonomically devised in our office setting. We are now forced to stay at home and do Zoom meetings for prolonged periods of time. And that in itself, if we don't use and move the body, it adapts to whatever environment we're in. So basically, every chair you sit in is a Jell-O mold, and it starts to create even greater imbalances in the hips and so on, that you're going to start to see a lot more ailments and syndromes and pain coming through your door because of this fact. That surfer I spoke of with the knee issues, the problem wasn't his knees. Actually, he was a skateboarder earlier in his years, and he had broken many bones in his feet and had rolled his ankles to the point where those feet weren't moving very well, and his ankles were practically locked up. So if you've got a joint that is responsible for a lot of movement, like the ankle, it's practically a ball and socket like the hip, and you start putting a gag order on that joint and say you can't move, almost like naturally fusing it, you've got to get the movement from somewhere else. It's just got to happen. And your brain is going to figure out the next best place. And usually it's a neighboring joint. And in his case, it took a while, but eventually his knees said, I'm done being an ankle. I just would like to go back to being a knee. If you could get that ankle to behave the way it should, all is going to be good with me. And that's what we did. He walked out yesterday. He came in walking in pain, and he left without pain. And I didn't honestly touch him. I didn't. I'm not a chiropractor. I can't make adjustments. I don't do manual therapies. I just look at the bones and how they move and what's not happening, and then figure out a strategy to get them to move better, and amazing things begin to happen.
That's awesome. I love how you break it down, per person, not just a blanket here's the workouts, here's the goal, and it's the same for everybody. You see so many one way approaches with so many trainers and healthcare in general that it's very important to individualize it for that specific problem, that specific person.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a problem within my industry, is that you go to a conference and you get these speakers coming up on stage and talking about different concepts of movement, but then they show you a couple of exercises and the audience goes, wow, those are amazing. They really helped that person out, or they got this going, or whatever the outcome was very positive. So I'm going to take those 3 or 4 exercises they showed me and I'm going to bring them back to my gym and start doing them with my clients. Well, it's not the exercise. It's not the movement. It's the concept that you should actually bring home. The concept of how the body moves is really what you need to understand, because then the exercise will appear based on how you see the body moving. Everyone is different. Like, Doc, you live a very unique existence. Nobody, even if you had a twin and you were identical, you were not going to live the same life because you've just had different experiences. And your body it encompasses all those experiences and has to adapt. And therefore, even identical twins, even though they may look very similar, are going to have different postural or structural elements or positions. And therefore, any movement that somebody does may have a different outcome on somebody else. So you really have to, group exercise, it's great. It's fun to be with people working out in a group. But whatever you're doing in that group exercise is just a shotgun blast to hopefully help everybody in the room. But there are going to be some people in the room where some of those movements are not going to be beneficial. They may be detrimental, and not one program is perfect for everyone. There isn't one size that fits all. You got to understand how the body moves and then create programs based on that. So it's just like your treatment. I'm sure every time a patient comes in, you're not doing the same adjustment on everyone that comes in. You're not giving them the same type of orthotic. You're not giving them the same kind of techniques. You've got to see what's going on. You diagnose the situation, and then you approach the issues and the tissues, the problem in the frame, and they go out feeling a lot better, a lot stronger, more aligned, lighter, more grounded, happier. You hear all these kind of outcomes from when the body gets back into a more balanced place.
Absolutely. And that's exactly how I do approach it, because I do think it's very important to be specific and individualized for that specific person and problem. And I wanted to ask you, before we start wrapping up here, what are some takeaways for athletes, both, amateur and pro, but also like if someone is just a regular person and they are sitting at a desk, what do you suggest to, so they can get the most out of their workouts without some of these injuries?
Most people, here we go. We're going to place blanket statements on here. So 80% of the listening audience, go ahead and listen to this. The other 20%, go ahead and turn the volume down. But most people need to move better. And most people load their bodies with weights too soon. You need to be able to be responsible for your own body weight in different positions. You need to be able to move against gravity cleanly and efficiently before you start loading weight onto your frame. And so I would recommend getting through some movements, and you can choose existing approaches like yoga and Tai Chi or a stretch class of some sort, and start to explore that and try and open up restricted areas, trying to go to places that you don't commonly go to. Because if you keep doing the same pattern over and over and expecting different results, that's the definition of an insanity. So rather, I would change your movements around. If you like going to the gym, don't do the same thing you've been doing. Start to explore the areas of weakness. Don't do the things that you're really good at, because we can pat you on the back all day long, but if you're really looking for a true change in your body, you've got to find where you don't commonly go and where you're uncertain of going. Now, I can throw this out too to your listening audience. I have like a free kind of giveaway, I'll call it. It's a little poster that it's a PDF file. If you go to my website, it's rockysnyder.com. go to the bottom of the page and you put in your email address. Yes, you will sign up for a newsletter, but I'm not going to inundate you. But you get the opportunity to get this little PDF file, which I call a foot map. And what it does is it has on it a whole bunch of, it has an illustration of 2 bare feet. And outside of the 2 bare feet, there are arrows pointing north, south, east, west, and then northeast and northwest, southeast, southwest. And what it shows you is the tissues that are going to be really shortened in your body, most likely based on where you feel pressure in your feet. So we were talking about how we use a force plate. So what I did was I'm kind of thinking, oh, well, when the body moves in this direction and force is over here, logic and education tells us that the body is probably in this position. So then what muscles are going to be short and which one's going to be long? Well, I know that when we do foam rolling, when you roll out on a foam roll or a ball, if everyone's familiar with that kind of soft tissue work, or even if you go to see a massage therapist, now you have kind of a list of the target areas that you may want to go to. So this foot pressure map, you look at it, you follow the arrow where your body is tending to travel toward, and then there's about 10 or 12 little a list of muscles that you may want to target when going to do foam rolling or massage or whatever. And the purpose being is that by stimulating that area, by lengthening the tissue out, it actually draws you back into a better aligned position. So rather than just search and destroy sore spots that are always going to be the same ones over and over, you can actually make long-lasting change by really checking in every time before you work out. Where's the pressure in my feet? Where am I today? And here's a good way in which I can start to bring myself back into a more balanced, aligned place, and then work out, and then maybe do it again at the end, because maybe some of those exercises actually pulled me away from that nice aligned position. So that's what I'd recommend.
Well, that's some great info there. And thank you for talking about that link, because actually I definitely want to see that too. That would benefit me greatly as well as my patients. And then any of the listeners out there definitely want to listen to that. So also I wanted to leave this with you. How do people follow you on Instagram? Do you do social media? Do you have any things that you can talk about with that? And then also the book, where they can find your book.
Yeah, the title of the book is Return to Center, not to be confused with the Elvis song. Return to Center is all about bringing your body back into a central place of balance, right? And it's strength training to realign the body, recover from pain, and achieve optimal performance. That's the subtitle. It's on all major booksellers. If you're a fan of Amazon, you can go there. If you're not a fan of Amazon, you can go to mascotbooks.com or just to my website, rockysnyder.com. Inside the book, what I've done is I wanted to go beyond just giving somebody a picture with words and try and explain what to do that way. So I created about 150 short videos on each of the movements and concepts found in the book. And I placed a QR code inside next to every concept and exercise. So you can take your phone and with the camera, hover over that QR code, and a YouTube video is going to pop up to give you more information, expand on concepts, actually guide you through the movements that are found in the book as you create your own program based on your gait mechanics or your posture or your foot pressure. And that foot pressure map is also, there's 2 of them found within the book itself. Now, with YouTube, aside from those videos, I've created a whole bunch more. The channel, you just search Rocky Snyder, and you can go to my channel. It'd be great if you want to subscribe, because I'm always adding content. I'm interviewing people as well in the fitness and conditioning world, just like you do. And so it's a great place, hopefully, to get more insight and information. Instagram is Rocky_Snyder. So Rocky and Snyder is SNYDER. You can go there. Facebook, do me a search there. And if you want to Google me and do Rocky Santa Cruz, not Rocky Philadelphia, and I'm a lover, not a fighter, so don't get me wrong. But if you go Rocky Santa Cruz or anything like that, my websites will pop up. And I love talking shop. So if you want to shoot me an email, I'm happy to respond. And so, yeah, if there's any athletes out there that aren't in the Nashville area but want to maybe get some kind of realignment and can't get to you, Doc, then maybe they can jump on that book and share it with their teammates or their coaches. And I'm happy to come out and do workshops and courses for trainers and and physical therapists. I actually teach chiropractors, physical therapists, sport coaches, athletic trainers, personal trainers, everybody in that realm. And it's a fun weekend workshop on how we look at movement and how we can better create programs for our athletes.
That's excellent. And myself too, I'd definitely be interested in that so I can really better help my patients, both, amateur and possibly pro or college. And thank you again for all this info today. I got a lot out of it. I really learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to staying in contact with you and really picking your brain a little bit more about this. Cause, even from my patients that come in, they have imbalances, but me personally as a chiropractor, I feel like I'm still an athlete. I have to stay in good shape to do my adjustments and to be able to help people all day. And I've been working out more than I used to. So I know that I'm trying to stay healthy, and I really want to help my patients. And I know if I'm not healthy, then I can't help them.
Yeah, I love talking shop. I mean, we could go on for another hour if you want. I have no problem there. My clients who are coming in about a half an hour may have something to say about it, but anytime I'd love to do that, and anything I can help for sure, because it's amazing when you get the body moving. You'll say yourself, but when you get it moving and in the right place, it's amazing what it can accomplish. So yeah, anything I can do to help, I'm happy to do so.
Sounds good. Thank you, Rocky. Well, I appreciate you being on the show today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So hopefully you enjoyed that today. I really got a lot out of it, and I know that Rocky's available. Like he said, we'll have his credentials on our page, Sporting Good Posture /Rocky. And I look forward to speaking to him again. And we're going to have some other guests coming up here soon, some more episodes on weight loss and posture that I think will really help you even from working from home. And remember, the coach's door is always open, even in the quarantine. This is Coach Margella. I'm Sporting Good Posture. How about you?
The Sporting Good Posture podcast is a broadcast wellness production powered by Ideal Health and Wellness Center. All content copyright 2019, all rights reserved. Executive producer Frank Sardella. Dr. Margella appears courtesy of Ideal Health and Wellness Center in Cool Springs. For more information, visit sportinggoodposture.com or follow Coach on Instagram @sportinggoodposture.